There is a particular kind of silence that exists right before something catastrophic happens. It is not the silence of peace. It is not the silence of calm. It is the silence of the universe holding its breath, pressing both hands over its mouth, desperately trying not to laugh at what is about to unfold. This is the story of the Vorkai Empire, and how they managed to start, fight, and catastrophically lose a war in the span of approximately 47 minutes. Now, to understand how spectacularly the Vorkai failed, you first need to understand who the Vorkai were. Picture a species that evolved on a world with lower gravity, shorter days, and absolutely zero natural predators. They were tall, elegant, 7 feet of pale, 4-armed grace, with 3 eyes arranged in a perfect triangle on their narrow faces. They had built starships, they had conquered 6 systems, they had assembled an empire spanning 11 inhabited worlds, and in doing so they had made the single most dangerous mistake a species can make in this galaxy. They had started believing their own propaganda. Supreme Fleet Commander Draxus Vel stood on the bridge of the Imperial warship Eternal Supremacy, which was quite possibly the most presumptuous name ever welded onto a hull, and stared at the tactical display with the quiet confidence of someone who has never once in his life been genuinely surprised. "Report," he said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a being who considers emotional inflection to be something lesser species indulge in. His second in command, a wiry officer named Pelok Tan, straightened immediately. Pelok was the kind of officer who straightened so fast at attention that he had once given himself a neck injury during a routine inspection. He was also, and this is important, the only person on the bridge who had actually read the intelligence files on humanity in full. Every page, including the appendices, including the footnotes, including the footnote that was itself a footnote, buried at the bottom of page 412, which simply read, "Do not engage. See all previous pages for reasons why. Then read them again." Pelok had flagged this concern 3 times in formal writing. He had been told each time to stop being dramatic. "The human outpost designated Pharaoh Station is within weapons range, Commander," Pelok said, his 3 eyes flicking briefly to the sensor readings and then back to his commander with the expression of a man watching someone walk confidently toward an unmarked hole in the ground. "Population estimate, 312 humans, 6 defensive turrets classified as light armament, no warships currently docked." Draxus Vel permitted himself something almost resembling a smile. Almost. He considered full smiles a waste of facial muscles. 300 humans, he repeated. "And they call this an outpost. They call it a research station, sir. Mineral surveying. They have been here for approximately 2 of their years. Their signal traffic suggests they are studying the asteroid belt in this system for rare element deposits." "Miners," said Draxus. "And scientists." "Mostly. Yes, sir." "Excellent." Draxus folded 2 of his forearms behind his back, keeping the other 2 loose at his sides, which was the Vorkai equivalent of looking relaxed and authoritative simultaneously. He had practiced this pose. "Then this demonstration will be brief. Signal the fleet." The fleet, for what it is worth, was not small. 14 warships, 2 carriers, a support vessel, the kind of assemblage you bring when you want to make a point, not when you actually expect resistance. This was in every tactical sense a hammer being used to flatten a grape. What Draxus did not know because he had not read the footnotes was that the grape had opinions. Inside Pharaoh Station, in a small room that smelled powerfully of recycled air and burnt coffee, a woman named Tara Ogun was elbow-deep in a geological core sample and not paying attention to anything else at all. Tara was 43 years old, originally from Lagos, with the kind of focus that made other scientists feel personally inadequate. She had been cataloging mineral strata for 6 hours straight, and had consumed 4 cups of coffee and 1 protein bar that she was fairly certain had expired 8 months ago. She felt fine. She felt, in fact, excellent. The alarm changed that, not immediately, because the first alarm was the passive sensor ping, which sounded like a polite doorbell, and Tara had set that particular alert to silent 3 weeks ago because the asteroid belt kept triggering it with debris drift, so she missed it. The second alarm was louder. This was the proximity alert. Tara looked up, blinked, and then looked at the readout on the wall screen. 14 warships. She stared at this for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, set it down and hit the station-wide intercom. "Hey," she said, in the tone of someone reporting a minor but mildly annoying inconvenience. "We've got company. Armed company. Someone want to look at this?" In the station's small command hub, 3 people were already looking at it. Commander Bren Solis, who ran Pharaoh Station, was a compact, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with gray at his temples and the very particular stillness of someone who had been in bad situations before and had learned to stop flinching. He stood at the central display with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the Vorkai fleet like he was doing math in his head. To his left was the station's communications officer, a young woman named Yuki Farr, who was already at her console sending signals on every available frequency. To his right was Dr. Ocean Mbeki, the station's chief scientist, who had the look of a man who had just remembered he left something important on the stove, except the stove was his entire life. "They're hailing us," Yuki said. "Put it through," Bren said. The voice that came through was translated automatically by the station's systems, and it carried the unmistakable tone of someone who has rehearsed this speech and is rather pleased with how it sounds. "Attention, human station. You are within the territory now claimed by the Vorkai Empire. You will surrender your installation, power down all systems, and await processing. Resistance will be met with immediate and total destruction. You have 3 of your minutes to comply." There was a pause. Bren looked at the display. He looked at 14 warships. He looked at Yuki. He looked at Ocean. He looked back at the display. 3 minutes, he said. "Yes, sir," Yuki confirmed. "Okay," Bren said. He unclasped his hands, walked to his own console, and did not notably power anything down. Instead, he opened a channel. A specific channel. The kind of channel that does not go to the Vorkai, or to any nearby ship, but to a set of coordinates approximately 4 light minutes away, where something had been sitting very quietly for the past 6 months, disguised brilliantly as an unremarkable chunk of asteroid. He sent one message. 11 words. Pharaoh Station. Hostile fleet. 14 warships, requesting immediate support. Authorization Ogun 7. Then he closed the channel and turned back to the Vorkai display. "Reply to them," he told Yuki. "Tell them we need more time to gather our personnel." Yuki glanced at him. "Do we?" "No," Bren said. "But they don't know that." On the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy, Draxus Vel received the human response with the patience of a being who has all the weapons and therefore all the time in the world. "They are stalling," Pelok Tan said quietly. "Of course they are stalling," Draxus said. "They are frightened. Let them have their moment of hope. It makes the lesson more complete." Pelok opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Sir, the intelligence files on human military doctrine suggest a response capability that we may have underestimated. Their colonial defense protocols include what they call a rapid response package, which is described in the files as Pelok. Sir, are you about to quote a footnote at me again? A pause. General. Yes, sir. Then I am going to stop you there. Draxus looked back at his display. 300 humans, scientists and miners, no warships in dock. We have 14 fully armed vessels. At what point in this arithmetic does the footnote become relevant? Pelok Tan looked at the sensor readings. He looked at them very carefully. He was looking specifically at a small anomaly he had noticed approximately 90 seconds ago. A gravitational reading from the asteroid belt, slightly irregular, in a way that real asteroids do not generally produce, because real asteroids do not have active power cores. Sir, he said very quietly, I think the footnote becomes relevant now. The first thing that appeared was not what anyone on the Vorkai fleet expected, because no one on the Vorkai fleet had ever seen it before, because no other species had ever successfully made one, because it had taken humanity 60 years and an embarrassing number of prototype explosions to get the design right. It was, in the language of human military designation, an Apex-class strategic response platform. In the language of everyone who had ever seen one in action, it was something else entirely. It did not arrive the way warships arrive, with the dramatic bloom of an FTL exit point and the elegant deceleration burn of a vessel orienting itself to a new location. It simply became visible, because it had been there the entire time, and it had simply stopped pretending otherwise. It was enormous. Not large the way a carrier is large, with the functional bulk of hangars and crew quarters and support systems. It was large the way a geological feature is large, in a way that made nearby objects seem like they had gotten the scale of existence slightly wrong. The hull was not clean and sharp and elegant. It was layered and scarred and covered in the particular texture of something that has been in service for a long time and has no interest in looking pretty. 14 gun emplacements rotated on its hull with a slowness that was somehow more threatening than speed. The way a very large and very calm animal turning to look at you is more frightening than something that screams. On the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy, every single console lit up simultaneously. What? Said Draxus Vel, for the first time in his military career, is that? Pelok Tan, who absolutely deserved to say I told you so and who was far too professional to actually say it out loud, said only, that, sir, is the footnote. The human vessel did not fire immediately. This was, in retrospect, the part that Draxus would find most unsettling later. In the private moments he was permitted before the end of his command career. It did not fire. It just waited. It put out a communication on the same frequency the Vorkai had used, and in perfect Vorkai standard language, a voice came through. Not translated. Perfect. Which meant someone, at some point, had studied them the way you study a problem you intend to solve. The voice was female. It was calm. It had the particular quality of someone who has done this before and considers it administrative. Vorkai fleet. This is Captain Amara Cross of the UEN vessel Relentless. You are currently targeting a civilian research installation under the protection of the United Earth Navy. I am going to ask you to stand down once. I have found in my experience that once is usually sufficient. Draxus looked at his weapons officer. His weapons officer looked back at him. Target it, Draxus said, and here is where things went, as Peloktan would later describe in his very detailed memoirs, comprehensively and irreversibly wrong. The Vorkai fleet opened fire. All 14 warships. The 2 carriers launched their strike craft. Every weapon that could be brought to bear was brought to bear, because Draxus Vel was not a stupid commander. He had looked at that ship and understood, on some instinctual level, that half measures were not an option. He was right about that part. What he was wrong about was the idea that full measures would be sufficient. The Relentless did not dodge. It did not evade. The incoming fire hit it, and some of it hit quite hard and scorched sections of its already scarred hull, and the hull took this the way old stone takes rain. It absorbed, it redistributed, it held, and then the Relentless replied, not all at once, because that would have been wasteful. Captain Amara Cross was not a wasteful person. She targeted precisely, methodically, with the particular patience of someone who has 14 targets and no reason to hurry. The first strike took out the lead warship's engines, not the ship, just the engines. The second disabled the weapons array on the vessel immediately to its right. The third, fourth, and fifth were similarly surgical, carving capability away from the Vorkai fleet the way a careful surgeon removes what does not belong. On the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy, nothing was going the way the rehearsed scenarios had suggested it would. Shields at 40%, someone reported. Strike craft are not penetrating its hull. 3 vessels are non-operational. 4 are reporting weapons failure. Draxus stood very still. He was doing the math. He was doing it very quickly because the situation demanded it, and the math was not producing numbers he liked. Pelok, he said. Sir, the footnote. What exactly did it say? Pelok folded his secondary arms behind his back. It said, sir, and I am paraphrasing slightly for clarity, that humanity responds to attacks on civilian installations with a level of force that is, and I quote directly here, not bound by the proportionality conventions of any known interstellar agreement, because humanity has not signed any such agreement, because when presented with such agreements humanity's delegates historically read the proportionality clauses and then laughed for an uncomfortable period of time before declining to sign. Draxus absorbed this. They laughed, he said. For an uncomfortable period of time. Yes, sir. The Relentless fired again, and the Eternal Supremacy shook in a way that expensive, prestigious flagships are specifically not designed to shake. We need to retreat, Pelok said. We cannot retreat, Draxus said. We are the Vorkai Empire. We do not retreat from 300 scientists and miners. With respect, sir, said Pelok, who was gripping the edge of his console with 3 of his 4 hands. We are not retreating from the scientists and miners. We would be retreating from that. He pointed at the display where the Relentless was now turning slightly, not because it needed to for weapons targeting, but because 3 of the Vorkai warships had attempted to flank it, which the Relentless had apparently found interesting enough to acknowledge. Draxus Vel stared at the battle display for a long moment. Then, for the first time in 20 years of command, he said 4 words he had never in his life expected to say. Signal a full retreat. But retreating, as it turned out, was not going to be the last of the Vorkai's problems that day. Because Captain Amara Cross had received Bren Solis's distress call, she had read the full report, she had seen the complete sensor package, including the origin point of the Vorkai fleet's FTL approach vector. She had run the calculations, she knew exactly where the Vorkai had come from, and she was already composing a message of her own, not to the retreating fleet, to Earth Central Command. The message was very short. It contained coordinates. It said only, they started it. The retreating Vorkai ships did not know this yet. They were busy being grateful that the enormous, terrifying vessel had stopped shooting at them the moment they turned away, because they had been expecting pursuit and had not received it, which they took as mercy. It was not mercy. It was patience. The universe held its breath again. And somewhere, on 11 worlds that currently called themselves an empire, not a single person had any idea that the next 40 minutes would change every single thing. There is a concept in human military philosophy, one that has existed since the very first time one group of humans decided to throw something sharp at another group of humans, and it goes like this. If you hit someone and run, you had better run to somewhere they cannot follow. The Vorkai did not know this concept. They were about to get a very thorough education. The 14 ships, or rather the 9 that were still capable of independent propulsion, limped back through FTL toward Vorkai Prime, with the particular energy of people who have touched a hot stove and are now moving very fast in the opposite direction, while also pretending they intended to do that all along. 2 of the disabled vessels were being towed. 1 had been left behind entirely, its crew rescued by a neighboring ship before Draxus Vel had made the call that some hardware was simply not worth the time. The remaining vessels had hull damage ranging from cosmetic to structurally concerning, and the mood aboard all of them could be best described as a silence so thick you could have built a wall with it. Draxus Vel stood on the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy and said nothing for 41 minutes of FTL travel. Pelok Tan stood 2 meters to his right, and also said nothing, because Pelok had spent 20 years learning exactly when to speak, and when to stand very quietly and let events develop at their own pace. This was one of the latter moments. He could feel it in all 4 of his arms. The fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Vorkai home system, and the familiar sight of Vorkai Prime filled the forward screens, pale and perfect and ringed by its 3 moons. And for a brief moment something almost like relief moved through the bridge crew. Then Pelok Tan looked at the long-range sensors. Then he looked at them again. Then he said, very quietly, "Commander." Draxus turned. "There is something in this system that was not here when we left," Pelok said. The display updated as the fleet sensors resolved the readings into clarity, the way a photograph develops in chemicals, detail emerging from blur in a progression that felt, to everyone watching, deeply and personally unfair. It was not one ship. It was not a fleet in the traditional sense either, because fleets have formations, and formations imply that the ships within them are paying attention to each other for navigation and coordination purposes. What was in the Vorkai home system did not appear to be paying attention to each other in any navigational sense whatsoever. They were simply there, spread across the system with the casual confidence of people who have already decided how this ends and are now just waiting for the paperwork. 31 vessels, of varying sizes. The smallest were still larger than the largest Vorkai warship. The largest was the Relentless, which had apparently gotten to Vorkai Prime before the retreating Vorkai fleet, which should have been physically impossible given the head start the Vorkai ships had, and which said something deeply uncomfortable about the actual maximum FTL capability of human vessels versus what humanity had apparently been willing to demonstrate publicly. They had been sandbagging. For how long, no one on the Vorkai fleet could say, but the answer was almost certainly long enough to make it count. A communication came through before Draxus could speak, on the same frequency Captain Cross had used before, in the same perfect Vorkai, in the same calm voice. "Commander Vel, this is Captain Cross again. I want to start by saying I appreciate that you chose to withdraw rather than continue the engagement. That decision reflects well on you personally, and I have noted it in my report. I also want to say that what happens next is not personal. It is, however, necessary." Draxus found his voice. "You followed us." "We did," Amara Cross confirmed. "We followed the FTL trail back to your point of origin. Standard procedure when an attack on a civilian installation cannot be attributed to rogue actors. Your fleet departed from a Vorkai military staging point, which means the attack was sanctioned at an Imperial level, which means the response is also at an Imperial level." Draxus gripped the edge of the tactical console. "You are threatening our homeworld." "I am not threatening anything," the captain said, and her voice carried the kind of patience that is somehow more threatening than anger because anger has limits and patience does not. "I am explaining a process. There is a difference. The process is, we have transmitted a full record of today's events to your planetary government, along with a list of conditions. The conditions are being reviewed right now by whoever makes decisions on Vorkai Prime. We are waiting for a response." Pelok leaned slightly toward Draxus and said, very low, "She said they have transmitted to the planetary government. I heard her, which means the civilian government is being contacted directly, not through us." A pause. "Also heard, which means," Pelok continued, with the slow care of a man diffusing something, "that she is specifically not dealing with the military. She is going over the fleet's head to the people who can actually authorize a political resolution, which means she does not want a fight, she wants a surrender, from someone with the authority to make it permanent." Draxus stared at the display for a long moment. Or she wants both. She already has both, Pelok said simply. We are not in a position to offer resistance, sir. We have 9 ships with partial capability against 31, one of which we have already seen absorb our entire fleet's fire and find it mildly inconvenient. The math has not changed in our favor during the trip home. On Vorkai Prime, in the Hall of Imperial Governance, which was a very tall building made of very expensive stone with very impressive architecture that had taken 600 years to complete and that everyone agreed was extremely beautiful, Grand Consul Varys Oal was reading the fastest arriving and most alarming diplomatic communication of his 400-year-old career. Varys was old by Vorkai standards, and had spent most of his long life carefully avoiding exactly this kind of situation. He had a talent for compromise, for the slow, careful work of politics, for finding the third option when everyone else only saw 2. He had guided the Vorkai Empire through trade disputes, succession crises, 2 internal rebellions, and 1 truly catastrophic misunderstanding involving a diplomatic gift that was culturally appropriate in one context and a profound insult in the other. He had never, in 400 years, dealt with 31 warships parked politely in his home system while their captain explained, in his own language, the terms under which his civilization would be permitted to continue existing. The message from the human captain was long. It was detailed. It was written with the particular precision of someone who had legal training or had worked extensively with people who did. Every condition was numbered. Every consequence of non-compliance was stated plainly, without embellishment and without threat, in the same flat descriptive language you might use to explain how a machine operates. Condition 1. The Vorkai Empire would acknowledge that Pharaoh Station and the system it occupied was human territory under the Outer Colonial Protection Act. Condition 2. The Vorkai Empire would provide full reparations for the damage caused during the attack, itemized and attached as Appendix A. Condition 3. The military officers who authorized the attack would be remanded for trial under whatever internal Vorkai judicial process the Empire preferred, provided the charges included unprovoked aggression against a civilian installation, and provided the process was transparent and documented. Condition 4. The Vorkai Empire would enter into a formal non-aggression framework with humanity, the terms of which were attached as Appendix B, and which Varys noted with some relief were not actually punitive. They were simply clear. And then, at the end of the message, in what Varys would later describe to his grandchildren as the part that made my secondary heart skip, there was a final paragraph. It read, "These conditions are fair and we believe you know they are fair. We are not here because we enjoy this. We are here because one of your fleet commanders decided that 300 scientists and miners were an acceptable target, and we want to make sure that this specific decision is never made again by anyone operating under your flag. We are not your enemies. We are your reminder. You have 72 of your hours to respond. We will wait." Varys read this paragraph 3 times. Then he called an emergency session of the full governing council, which took 40 minutes to assemble because 2 of the senior consuls were on holiday and had to be reached by personal communicator, and one of them refused to believe what he was being told until Varys read the message aloud while 31 ships sat visible in the system's sensor grid. The council deliberated for 6 hours. This was, given the circumstances, actually quite efficient. Meanwhile, back in the shell of the retreating fleet, Draxus Vel had received orders from the planetary government, not from the military command, from the civilian government directly. The orders were very short. He was to hold position, maintain silence, and make absolutely no aggressive action of any kind. There was a second line that was not officially an order but which conveyed a very clear sentiment. It said, "This situation is under political management now. Please stop helping." Draxus read this twice. "Pelok," he said, "Sir, in your footnotes, was there anything about how humanity typically behaves once a conflict has reached this stage?" Pelok considered this. There was a section, yes. It described human negotiation posture following military success as measured. The document used the word deliberate. It noted that humanity historically offers terms that are strict enough to be meaningful but not so punitive as to breed long-term resentment, because they have found through considerable historical experience that punitive terms create enemies who plan revenge, and humanity, the document noted, finds dealing with revenge plots tedious. They find it tedious, Draxus repeated. The exact phrasing was unnecessarily time-consuming given that better options were available at the original decision point. Draxus sat down in his command chair. This was notable because he had not sat down during an active operation in 11 years, on principle. He sat down now because his legs had simply made the decision without consulting him. "They are not even angry," he said. No, sir. We attacked their people and destroyed their property, and they are treating this as a scheduling inconvenience. That appears to be an accurate characterization, yes, sir. A long silence settled over the bridge. Then Draxus said something that Peloktan would include in his memoirs as one of the most unexpectedly perceptive things he ever heard a superior officer say. That is the most frightening thing I have ever encountered in 40 years of military service. Pelok nodded slowly. The footnote suggested it would be, sir. On Vorkai Prime, Grand Consul Varys Oal met with his full council, and then met with his military advisors, and then met with 3 independent legal scholars who had spent their careers studying interstellar treaty frameworks. And at the end of all of this meeting, the answer was the same as it had been at the beginning. There was really only one rational path forward. The conditions were fair. The alternative to accepting them was written very quietly between every line of that communication, and it did not need to be stated outright because everyone in every room could see 31 ships on every sensor screen. The ships had not moved. They had not powered weapons. They had not made threats. They simply sat there, patient and enormous, like a fact that the universe had decided needed to be acknowledged. Varys drafted the response himself. He was a good writer. He had written many difficult communications in his long career. This one was, in some ways, the easiest, because there was genuinely only one thing to say. He accepted all 4 conditions. He added a 5th one himself, unprompted, which stated that the Vorkai Empire would establish a joint review committee for any future territorial claims in contested systems, to prevent a recurrence of the specific failure of process that had led to a fleet commander being given authority to act unilaterally against a civilian installation. He felt this was important. He also felt privately that including it unprompted demonstrated something about Vorkai good faith that the situation genuinely required. Captain Amara Cross received the response exactly 61 hours after sending the conditions. She read it on the bridge of the Relentless with 3 of her senior officers present, and a cup of very mediocre ship-brewed coffee going cold at her elbow. She read it once, then she sent a reply, which was 4 sentences long. It said, "We accept your response and commend the additional condition you included. The 5th condition demonstrates exactly the kind of structural thinking that prevents these situations from becoming cycles. The fleet will begin withdrawal from your system within the hour. We look forward to the formal treaty negotiations which our diplomatic corps will initiate through standard channels." She sent it. She picked up her coffee. She drank the cold coffee without complaint because she was the kind of person who finishes her coffee regardless of temperature because wasting it feels wrong. Lieutenant Joran Vex, her tactical officer, watched her do this. "That's it?" he said. "That's it," Amara confirmed. "We had 31 ships in their home system. We could have what, Joran?" She looked at him. Her expression was not unkind. It was the expression of a teacher who has asked this question before and is genuinely interested in the answer. Joran thought about it. "More," he said finally. "We could have gotten more. More consequences, yes. More territory, theoretically. More reparations." She set the coffee cup down. "And in 40 years, when the Vorkai have rebuilt their fleet and nursed 3 generations of resentment, we would have gotten more of something else too. Something messier, something that would cost more to resolve than we gained in the first place." She looked out at the view screen where Vorkai Prime hung in the distance, pale and quiet. "They made a mistake, a big one. We made sure they understood the scale of that mistake, and then we gave them a way forward that doesn't require them to hate us to survive it." She paused. "That's how this works," she said. "When it works." She stood, rolled her shoulders and picked up the cold coffee again. "Begin withdrawal. Signal Pharaoh Station that the situation is resolved and they can go back to their rocks." Joran followed the order. As he was doing so, he said, "Shouldn't we feel more triumphant? We just made an empire blink." Amara Cross considered this on her way to the door. "Talk to Bren Solis," she said. "He's the one who had 14 warships pointed at his station while he bought time by pretending to gather personnel he had already gathered. He gets the triumphant feeling. We just did our jobs." She left the bridge. At Pharaoh Station, in the small room that still smelled of recycled air and the ghost of bad coffee, Tara Ogun received the all-clear signal, looked at it for a moment, and then went back to her geological core sample. She had 6 more hours of cataloging to finish. Some things, she had found, did not care about the scale of events happening outside the window. The mineral strata were the same before the Vorkai fleet arrived, and the same after it left. The rare elements in the asteroid belt had not rearranged themselves out of excitement. The work was the work. Although, she noted, turning the core sample slowly in her gloved hands and finding a very satisfying vein of something that might be a previously uncatalogued compound, the coffee situation was going to need addressing. She had drunk the last of it during hour 3 of the standoff. She typed a requisition order. 1 item. Coffee. Premium blend. 4 kilograms. Reason for request. Essential operational supply. Priority high. Somewhere in the system, the Vorkai fleet was limping home to face an empire that was going to spend the next several decades reckoning with what a very bad morning looked like when you aimed it at the wrong people. Somewhere in the middle distance, 31 human warships were beginning their orderly withdrawal like professionals who had a schedule to keep. Somewhere in the galaxy's long, complicated history, this moment was taking its place among the lessons that civilizations learn once if they are lucky and not at all if they are not. And in a small room on Pharaoh Station, Tara Ogun finished her coffee requisition, turned her core sample to the light, and found exactly the vein she had been looking for. She wrote it up, carefully. With all the right measurements and notations, it was, she decided, a very good day.
Would you have listened to Palco warnings? Let me know below. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. See you next time.